Every 10 minutes, 1,000,000 likes.
All right, so this is all about permaculture and beekeeping. How many of you have ever heard the term permaculture before?
From you last year.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. You told me you came in just right at the end of the presentation last year. So before we kind of get into things, I got a couple things I want to show you. And not a lot of hands went up, so let me just confirm that again. How many of you have heard permaculture before? So it's kind of a brand new term. How many of you have gardened before?
Many.
How many of you keep bees? How many of you know a beekeeper?
You know, overbee.
Okay, well, I'm Jamon, so now you all can raise your hand. Yeah, so beekeeping and permaculture kind of go hand in hand. Permaculture is a design science by which we are able to arrive at solutions. So permaculture, by definition, my favorite definition of permaculture is that it's a holistic approach to a whole systems design. Permaculture itself is not gardening, it's not foodscaping, it's not food forests like you'll hear a lot in the permaculture movement. It's not beekeeping, it's not even holistic building materials and land management and construction and engineering, but all of those things play a role in permaculture. So there's many elements that permaculture will cover. What we're going to talk about today is specifically along the lines of a food forest and beekeeping and how they integrate and how we can overlap them. So I've got a couple things that I'm just going to pass around and I'll let you guys kind of take a look at it, but just give me some quick thoughts here. What does this say to you when you see it?
That the print's too small.
Just the picture. Just the picture. What does that bring to mind?
Erosion.
Erosion?
I see it as a root
Kind of a
structure.
synergy?
Yeah, the root system is what's.
Yeah, the root system, kind of a cool picture. Yeah, my wife drew that. All right, so what this is a design system. This is actually a real blueprint for what we call a guild in a food forest. This is a design that we did for a client out in Orange County, California. And this is just one page of a multi-page document. This is the actual design itself. Now there's a lot of different elements and pieces of the puzzle. Permaculture, I'll just tell you right now, since it's kind of an introduction to you, permaculture can be very, very overwhelming because it is massive in its umbrella of all the things that it encompasses. And there's a lot of people that are in the permaculture space who go way off the end into, hippie rocker world over here, and then a whole nother area over here where they just haven't quite caught the synergy of it all, and they're kind of stuck in the mundane, rototilling monoculture methods, and they just haven't broken the mindset on that just yet. And so there's a happy medium right there. That's where we want to find it, right? That's where we exist with TIAG and Haven Permaculture and what we're trying to do with families. So before I pass this around, this is a little packet that I brought with me that just shows different ways to connect with us, and it has a sweet little freebie in here. I'm going to give this away at some point today. I have no idea how or when, but I brought it, so I'm going to give it to you. And what this freebie, is a garden planner, and I will pass that around right now. It's a garden planner. What you'll do is you'll put on your last frost season, you'll put the red line. Hold it right, in the spring, your first and last frost, depending on which side you're holding it. So we're in Leavenworth. Does anybody know what the frost date is out here for spring?
April 19th, somewhere in there.
April 19th, so you'll slide the red line down to about April 19th, right there. That'll tell you your planting times, your sunshade requirements, your companion plants, the list of plants that it actually accommodates for what you're planting with this list. It'll tell you the soil depth and the moisture requirements, the temperature at which the seed germinates. And then you can flip it over, do the exact same thing for your fall frost as well, your first frost. And this is actually going to give you two growing successions out of the year. So this is a super cool little freebie. I'm going to hand it around, you can take a peek at it. We'll just work it through and then bring it back up here when you're done. Another cool thing I brought with me is this. I'm going to give one of these away today too. So this is a food forest guide. What this is just highlights 7 layers of the 9 layers of a food forest. There are officially 9 layers in a food forest, but a more simple way of looking at it is 7. And this is what you'll find when you Google it and you look all over the place. And what we're doing with a food forest is we're looking at nature and we're saying, hey, nature, nobody stands on the hillside and waters it. You ever see anybody with a hose out there like trying to keep the forest alive? or fertilizing or tilling the forest, why does the forest grow? Why year after year after year, all these weather extremes, why is it growing still?
Self-sustainable.
It's completely self-sustainable, yeah. So why is it self-sustainable? Is it just because it's just made that way and it's briars and thorns and they're hardy and that's just the way weeds work? No, it's because there's a system. There is a total system. So God is really clever in his design process. And what he did is he integrated a natural system into the forest of the world. A healthy ecosystem follows this 9-layer principle. This 9-layer principle we can look at, and yeah, there might be some briars and thorns and poison ivy, whatever. We can replace those species that are performing that function with an agriculturally productive species. Now we have an agriculturally productive food forest. Now there's a concept out there in the world that is slightly flawed, not completely, but slightly, that all of our cultivating crops need a massive amount of sunlight. And we have to put everything in the field, like direct sun all the time and bake it. And the reason that came about is because, number one, you get more photosynthesis, you get more crops, you get more sugar exchange, you get more soil working. But the downfall of all of that is that there are microorganisms that can't always handle that kind of direct sunlight. And there are a lot of species that will put into the ground that stumble when we are putting them in an element that's not their native element, right? Their native environment. So what we're doing in a food forest is we're looking at what their native environment is, and we're duplicating it in an agriculturally productive system. And I'll show you some photos of some results of doing this. Now, there's a whole lot to this, like I told you before. So I'm gonna speed through this presentation, and I'm gonna show you a whole bunch of stuff. The reason I'm doing that is because I just want to get your feet wet. We have 45 minutes, right? And it takes a professional 3 days to teach you what permaculture is, just so you understand it. Then we dive into systems design, and then you can become a botanist and go into the details of the plants, like all these things. But we have 45 minutes, and so I'm going to give you as much info as I can, get you excited, try to get you your feet wet a little bit, and then I'm going to give you some resources to connect with us and to continue to learn more, all free, and just some handouts and stuff. Okay, so this is the first one. This is just a bunch of QR codes. You're welcome to snap a photo of this with your phone and then look them up later. I'll give you some more here on the slideshow as well. And those will take you to our social media platforms, our YouTube, our actual website, chat channels where you can just contact our team. We're all a nonprofit organization, so we have a bunch of people behind me that are all ready to talk to you. Okay, so this here is the principles and ethics of permaculture. So there's 3 core leading ethics and 12 principles that guide that design process, okay? So it's not just willy-nilly deciding to replace plants as we go. We're actually following a specific standard. And this is practice, just for reference. This is practiced all over the world. This isn't something I created. It's not something brand new. This is all over the world, and we're actually picking up a lot of Native American rituals and patterns and habits that they had in their culture to be able to perform what we're doing now. So this is actually an old world technology meeting the modern day, right? So we're just bringing it back. We're trying to hone in for that, okay? Now, how many of you ever heard the term TIAG? So TIAG, oh, and welcome everybody. TIAG officially is an acronym that stands for the Independent American Gardener. Now, we use the term independent not because we want everybody to be isolated and alone in a massive community, but we want you to be able to become self-reliant enough so that you can find what you need in a self-sufficient community. So much like a guild or a companion planting garden, if you walk out in your garden, flowers benefit your fruit trees, right? Or all of your melons, you get bigger yields when they cross-pollinate. All these different things happen. We want you to be able to do the same thing in your community. But it starts at home, as you, being independent, choosing to do this yourself, right? Now, once upon a time, when we started all of this, I read this quote from Mahatma Gandhi. Said, be the change you want to see in the world. And when I read that, it kind of hit me like a rock, because I was looking at my kids and seeing what they were doing, and we homeschool our family. I got a family of 6 kids and my wife. Now 6. Last time we were here it was 5. And I was looking at what the world that they were going to grow up in, and it kind of disturbed me a little bit, right? We see some things going on. And so we decided that we needed to do something different, and we needed to do it right now and teach families. And so we picked up, we sold our house, and we traveled the country. And we spent the last 2 years on the road full-time in a camper with a family of 7. As we were traveling and teaching all around the country and up into Canada, we started to spread our mission, and we called it the awareness campaign, where we just held events all over the country. Then following that process, we developed a network. And our purpose was to be able to found these organizations. So we founded the nonprofit TIAG, the Independent American Gardener. We networked to find the designers that could facilitate the needs of haven permaculture design processes. So now we can help families turn their homes into havens, strongholds against the storm. And then I have a background in personal development. And so I integrated what I understand of personal development and self-mastery and brought that together to help educate the youth. So all of this plays a role in TIAG. Okay, so you hear the term TIAG, understand that this is something that is kind of making waves across the country right now. It's not just me sitting here in front of the screen today. This is a cool opportunity for me to come down here and do this, but we've been doing a lot behind the scenes. Our focus in all of this is many hands make light work. So how many of you actually know your neighbor? Can you tell me your neighbor's name if I asked you right now? Mm-hmm. Awesome. So that's what I like to see. How many of you gather with your neighbor and plant food? Build rain catch systems, grow trees, get chickens, not for eggs once in a while.
Inviting for dinner, does that count?
Yeah. So that is the way that I grew up, and I want to see that become the standard again. And I think that the closer you get to the cities, the less that becomes realistic. And so we're trying to turn that around a little bit and help people understand that there's an important thing that happens when families come together and create community. We believe the 4 pillars of self-sufficiency are food, water, shelter, and surplus. If a property within the boundaries of its 4 walls can manufacture the source of its own food, water, shelter, and surplus, that family becomes independent of the municipalities, becomes independent of the power grid, becomes, you could be connected to the grid, that's totally fine. But to be dependent on the grid is terribly dangerous. To be dependent on the food coming in from China is terribly dangerous. And whether or not it's because of an apocalypse or all these scary things that emergency preparedness tends to get into, the reality is it's an adulteration of freedom. When we give our power to somebody else and we are susceptible to their decisions to get what we need. And so our movement is not just about creating safe havens for families in their own homes, it's also about taking back freedom and being able to create that place and that stronghold in America again, where families own the source of their food, water, shelter, and surplus. And we can barter and trade and we can get what we need because we're the ones creating it. Does that make sense? So that's why this is so important to me. Now, our core goals are a food forest in every single yard. And the way that we're doing that and why we're around the country is a mentor in every home. We actually go into living rooms and we teach kids like this with groups of their communities. Now I want to show you some of that. We don't have time for all of that, so I just want to get you this. This is our YouTube channel. I am giving away greenhouse blueprints at the table after the class. If you'll subscribe and show me that you subscribe to us on YouTube, I will give you a blueprint. There's plenty of videos on here showing what we've done around the country, lots of education from our beekeeping classes and different food forest workshops, swale workshops, all kinds of different permaculture topics. And all you gotta do is just show me that you subscribe and I'll give it to you. You can unsubscribe right after if you want to, just I say you don't, right? But I just need proof that you did it, okay? Now, the big part of what we're doing is that we can't just help everybody, get the vision and then walk away. We wanna give you a walkie-talkie so that as you're trying to figure all this out, you know how to contact us. So what we did with the nonprofit is we founded a private membership community. So you can join the community totally free and take the initiative. It's called the Haven Initiative. The Haven Initiative costs nothing. You just become a member of the initiative, and that'll give you access to our team, our resources, our digital resource library that grows every single month. We have herbalists, we have certified massage therapists, holistic practitioners, myself and other permaculture designers all on the team. So this is a great resource for you. You can get on that membership, or you can choose to upgrade to the paid plan where a lot of the actual professional services are offered, and we do monthly webinars and things like that. But that's tiagcommunities.org. Now, how many of you are here for emergency preparedness? Have you ever realized that when you buy seeds, you put them in your backpack, or you go shove them in your food storage, and then next year comes and the next year comes and they're still there.
Yeah.
I want to see people take them out of their backpack, put them in the ground. If you buy heirloom seeds, they come back on their own, right? You can take those seeds and then you can plant again next year. You never need to buy seeds again. Buying seeds is one of the worst ways to spend your money, unless you don't already have heirloom non-GMO seeds, right? Once you get those resources, then you can turn around and duplicate it every single year. You never need to buy your seeds again. There's no reason to. And you should know how to do that skill, right? So we want to see you grow food and replace your lawns with something productive and actually maximize your space. Most people that tell me all over the country, this is a common theme. I don't have the space to turn my home into a haven. Well, I'm standing in a grass lawn talking to them, right? And it's my front yard or the back to the side yard, whatever. I'm just going to encourage you to look at your yard a little differently and consider the space you live in. Now we're kind of living in a world where it's a really fragile culture, a lot of things going on, some scary stuff. I'm not going to talk about any of it. I just want to make the point that we are, as a culture and as a people, bombarded with that all the time. And our kids are growing up in that all the time. And so if this is the problem, all these different topics, and there's like a whole list I'm not even putting on this chart here, we need to get out of that thinking and break free of it so we can solve the problems and be solution oriented. So one of the founders of permaculture said, though the problems of the world grow ever more complex, the solutions remain embarrassingly simple. And I would argue that is one of the most true statements I've ever heard in my life. So we're going to move into the rest of this with solution thinking, okay? So we're not talking about solving some of the existing problems by highlighting what the problem is and then dissecting all the problems attached to that problem. We're just going to move forward with a solution mindset, okay? So I believe one of those solutions to the world's greatest problems is a food forest. I believe that diving into an ecosystem-based design process is a path towards solution thinking. So what is an ecosystem-based design, by a show of hands? What comes to mind when I say ecosystem design?
Companion planting?
Companion planting? Yeah, absolutely. What else?
Self-sustaining.
Self-sustaining? Yeah. Let's think about the natural forest. If we're standing out there in the thicket next to us here, or somewhere between here and your house, right? You just pulled off the side of the road and you walked out there, what would you see? Just walking out into the untamed forest, what would you see?
Briars.
Some briars, thorns, poison ivy.
Tall
Sure.
trees, short trees.
Tall trees and short trees, yeah, what else?
Bushes.
There's one thing I'm looking for, it's really, really important. It's probably the most important thing you're gonna walk on.
Squirrels.
Nope.
Decaying foliage?
Decaying foliage, that's pretty close. The word is mulch.
Yeah, okay.
Every single year, the forest grows. These deep, deep roots pull up nutrients that no other plants can reach. Those trees are water pumps, right? They're moving all that up into the branches. The branches bring it out into the leaves, and what do the leaves do every single year? Build topsoil. They fall, they accumulate, they go 12 inches, 2 feet in some places, and then over the season, they decompose, doing what? Putting more nutrients back into the soil. So this is ecosystem design. That's God's design. That happens naturally all over the world. So all we have to do is see patterns like that when we're looking at our garden and go, okay, I'm just gonna take the poison ivy out of there, and maybe put in broccoli, or something else instead. Maybe instead of a crazy ivy that's going across the ground, I'm gonna do creeping thyme, right? We're just gonna get a little bit more thoughtful on what we're doing with our system. Now, permaculture is the conscious design and maintenance of agriculturally productive ecosystems. It is the conscious design and maintenance. That's where we're actually putting thought into this agricultural process. Now, how many of you have sat back, pulled up a piece of paper and gone, okay, I'm gonna put my raised bed here, raised bed there, my paths are gonna go between it, I'm gonna have raised beds throughout all this. Does that sound familiar? That's how I started. Now, when you're looking at this through the lens of permaculture, you're looking at the landscape. You're seeing a tilt on the landscape, and you're going to say, oh, actually, when the water flows, every time it rains, the water runs right here, and I get this huge erosion spot. So what if I put check dams inside that caused the pool, and then I planted my fruit trees along the side of that actually would take advantage of the soil moisture underground. And what if I drew a line on contour, a slightly flat ditch called a swale, and as the water hit that swale, it pulled up and spread along the hillside instead of racing down the slope. There's my erosion solution and my moisture solution. I never have to water my garden again. Does that make sense? So we're just looking at it a little differently. Then we're going to say, actually, there's a flat spot right here that's perfect for that raised bed I was going to put over here where it's all wet. Does that make sense? So we're just changing the paradigm. We're just changing the perspective a little bit. The harmonious integration of both land and people in a sustainable way is the missing element in how society is built today. That is the problem in cities. That is the problem in neighborhoods. That's all the water hits our roof, falls down to the ground, runs into the city, and then where does it go? Down the drain to the city, and then the city does what?
Charges.
They charge you. But what do they do before they charge you for it?
For my water.
They poison it. They poison it with things that are known carcinogens, right? Neurotoxins. They poison it, and then they bill you to give it back. That does not make sense to me. That is completely backwards. So what if every drop of water that landed on our property stayed on our property? What if we caught that and it never left the landscape? And then whether it was in the ground and permeating through the subsoils and all the plant species, or in a rain tank, or maybe several rain tanks all throughout the property in succession, if it's a big acreage, if there's a pond, right? What if all these systems were playing a role so that no water that hit the landscape ever left the landscape, except for those 100-year events where it filled your system and you had 100% capacity and the outflow was even a design, the exit strategy. And now your neighbors are getting blessings. Their fence isn't falling when those 100-year events come around. I've had real experience with this in California, and it's a big deal when you just put a little bit of thought into where the water goes. Any thoughts on that?
In Greenwood, Kansas, there's an implement dealer out there, but that's what they do. They capture all the water that hits their property, goes in this concrete pond,
Yeah.
and then they use that water to water their lawn and everything else in the dry season. And they've got green grass year round.
There you go. Yeah, just a little bit of catchment goes a long way. There's a lot of desert projects that we're working on in Arizona, and it's the same thing. They'll put big channels, I forget what they're called, they dig them across the whole state. It's a big ravine, big water catchment system. Canal, yeah. But what they do is they'll let the townsmen take water from the canal on a schedule, and all the yards, if you drive through like Tempe or Mesa, Arizona, you'll see their yards are submerged, and they've got little berms around the perimeter. Instead of like out here where we have it mounded up, the water comes off of it. Out there, they open the spillway, it fills their yard, and I was driving down there in the perfect time, watching all these orange trees growing, and there's ponds in everybody's front yard. And I'm like, that's great, but like, why? And I get out and you do a little more research on videoing and talking to people about it and finding out that this is a routine system that they use to irrigate. The funny thing is that there is no productive species in that entire system, it's just dirt. So they're just irrigating the dirt. So what if we just thought about that a little bit more? Now we're thinking about the species selection, right? So yeah, you can go through the process and you can move your water the way that you want it to get your food forest thriving. But sometimes it doesn't hurt to have that extra input from another person to get a little bit further along in your design process. This is why we bring in a mentor in every home. Our goal is not just a food forest in every yard, it's also a mentor in every home. So we have online content, we have right now in this moment, consider this your living room, right? Our goal is to help teach and educate. Now, this is a free guide that we have in one of the digital resource libraries when you become a member of the community. This is going to highlight all the ethics and principles. This is the one I just passed around. If you missed it, this is what we just handed around. On this, when you're sitting in front of your garden and you're looking through the principles, I want you to ask yourself, does my current garden, my current system, align with all 12 of these? If it doesn't, consider what element is missing. Where do you have a clash in the synergy? Where do you have a single point of failure? And how do you maximize that redundancy? Emergency preparedness is kind of one of those. I have a big background in emergency preparedness in my family, and there's this part of this problem where everybody in emergency preparedness depends on the fact, the idea that one day they're going to be all alone fighting for their food. And it's like the food storage war, right? Everybody has this background story that I've got my food storage, I got my supplies, and well, the city's over there, so I got my bug out point B, point A, you know, my family's gonna gather over here, my bunker, you know, all these different thoughts. But the whole paradigm is based on the idea of war. you're putting yourself in an absolute war, basing the idea that you're the only one that has food storage and supplies. So what if we had this kind of system in your entire neighborhood? Nobody was without food, nobody was without water, and nobody turning the municipalities off could change that. How powerful of a community would that be in an emergency? So this is what we're trying to create. This is what we want to see happen. That is the vision of TIAG, the Independent American Gardener Communities. Now the class topic talked about bees. How many of you here for bees? What's bees versus gardens? Raise your hand. Gardens first. Are you here for gardening? You're here for bees?
Both.
Both. Okay, kind of weeded everybody out. All right, so why do bees and permaculture coexist?
Yeah, bees help.
They benefit the whole system, right? Bees are what we call a cornerstone in the system. Yeah, they're a cornerstone element. So I like to see every single household with some form of bee interaction. Not everybody can be a beekeeper, but you might have a pollinator garden, right? So a lot of people are allergic, but you might have, I forget what they're called. They're those little hollow sticks in the makeshift bird thing that certain bee species will go into. Not honeybees, but pollinating species.
Mason bees.
What's that?
Mason bees, I
Mason
believe?
bees, yeah. So yeah, there's all kinds of ways to get involved with bees. Beekeeping particularly makes me feel super good. I love bees. When you get a harvest at the end of the year, and you just put all this work into your system, and you turn around and you realize you're gonna touch this box all year long, and you open it up, and there's 100 pounds of honey in there, you're like, okay, the rest of the work makes sense now because I got honey. It's a lot of work to install a permaculture garden. It's a lot of work to install a food forest. It's not easy, but it's something you do once, you do it right, and then it benefits and blesses you for years and years and years, right? Generationally, because we're working with perennial species. We're building a forest essentially, and we can cultivate annual crops in the mix to get a harvest now, right? But in the mix of all of that, when you have a hive coming out of the equation, you're getting an annual surplus. And that's just such a benefit to your whole system overall as well. Now there's a couple problems I just want to point out about bees. So I don't have all this memorized, I'm just gonna read it off to you. 1 in 4 wild bee species in the US are at risk of extinction. Bees are a keystone species, which means when something affects them, it affects everybody. Bees affect most life on Earth, and 3/4 of US agricultural land is pollinated by bees. So if these are some of the problems that we're dealing with bees, and they're in such, you hear about the disease in Northern California, they just vaccinated bees 2 years ago? That blew my mind. There's some things that are happening behind the scenes that with bees that we just don't pay attention to. And even if you did, and you're really off into that world, what are we doing to change it? What are you aware of right now? What steps can you take right now to enhance pollination in your garden?
Not use certain chemicals.
Yeah, not using pesticides. What else? More flowers, yeah. Well, why do we want to do that? Why do we want to attract bees? Especially if you're allergic. Yeah, it helps your garden grow. You're going to get more fruit off your fruit trees, you're going to get bigger melons, you're going to get all kinds of fruit off your vines. There's going to be way more produce and production on your property. Just a little bit of pollination comes in. Most properties are mulchless, most gardens are mulchless, it's just bare soil, and there's no flowers. And if it's a man gardening out there, the wife's flowers in the front of the house, and he's back here in dirt, right? And so, what if the systems overlap? We had flowers through the whole thing. And what if the branches of your fruit tree, this is frowned upon traditionally in orchards, what if the branches of the fruit trees interacted with each other? In polyculture systems, they do. In permaculture systems, they do. Why is that? They do in nature. We're mimicking nature. Why do they do that in nature? What happens in nature when branches come really close together like this? A lot of different species will come right up to each other, and they'll just leave this cool little gap between them all. But some species, branches will interweave like that. So when a bee comes into that apple tree and is pollinating that apple tree, it doesn't even know it's on a totally different branch, a totally different tree, and it's in the same bush. It never flew out of the tree to go to another plant. So you're getting pollination, double the pollination, just by planting them a little closer together, right? Now the reason they don't do that in orchards is because disease spreads from tree to tree to tree, right? But if we're doing this in a system where we're treating the soil and we're focusing on the strengths of the ecosystem, we're eliminating some of the conditions that are going to create those diseases in the first place. And so it's kind of your choice, which way do you want to run this, right? Now, some of the strengths, we're going to talk about the weaknesses, let's talk about the strengths. Some of the strengths that bees have, there are more than 20,000 distinct bee species around the world, and the USA has 4,000 of them. That's a lot. Bees exist in all climates around the world, including the Arctic Circle, which I thought was fascinating. So now, where does this image bring your mind? You see this desert drought landscape and this big, lush, beautiful forest. I'm going to start picking up the space here so we can get through the slides before running out of time. When we're looking at systems like this, let me go back there. We're looking at monocultures, today's traditional agriculture. If they stopped maintaining it, this is what would happen. Because the system has been degraded and eroded. Eventually, briars and thorns would take over, and then nature would start kicking it back into gear, and it would start going through the natural succession of shrubs and pioneer species, and eventually, down the road, it'd come back into a prairie, and then eventually to a forest, right? But it takes eons. We'd be long gone by the time it was anything beautiful. And so, if this is what the result is of the degeneration, what if we just looked at it a little bit more regeneratively? And this is just a generic image. That's still a monoculture of flowers, right? But this is a cool concept, is it not? Now, if we're looking at a food forest and we have a pattern to follow, what's the pattern? Does anybody know what a food forest layer system is? Okay, we have 7 layers. Okay, I'm going to read them off. We got canopy layer, sub-canopy layer, the vining layer, the shrub layer, herbaceous layer, the ground cover layer, and the rhizosphere, which is where your potatoes and garlic. Now, if we go a little bit further than that, there's really, if you look it up, you'll find 7 layers all over. We teach 9 layers. There's also the fungal layer and the aquatic layer. So the fungal and the aquatic cannot be understated. The importance of them cannot be understated in a system. And when you're working with bees, one of them is extremely important to them. Do you know what it is?
Water.
Water. Bees cannot even exist on your property if water is too far away from them. They can't eat water. So bees burn calories when they fly, right? So when they're going flower to flower to flower and they're getting nectar, they're able to kind of supplement some of the calories that they're burning off when they're flying long distances. But they can't carry water for a long distance. They can't stop and drop their water and then pick it back up and go, get some food and replenish their energy. So they have to have it close enough that they can make that shoot home again in one shot. Okay, so this is why you see people with bird feeders and other things. If you put a bird feeder out, you see a bunch of bees in it. If you put a bird feeder out and you put a bunch of rocks in it so that they have something to land on, then you're helping. Does that make sense? So there's just little things that we can do that make a big difference. How many of you have ever seen a hive like this before? Yeah, 2 of you? 3? Does anybody know what this is called? So this is a lay-ins hive. Lay-ins hive model, a horizontal hive, is built on the concepts of having insulation on the inside, so it's about this thick of a wall. We have insulation in there that's raw sheep's wool, and when we build these, we put 6 pounds of raw sheep's wool insulation in these hives. So then by the time that we bring them into a cold climate like this, we're mimicking the insulation properties of a natural tree trunk that a bee would find themselves in nature. How many of you know what kind of surplus comes out of a hive? So we get, they're on the screen. Yeah. But there's one that a lot of people forget and don't know about. Pretty close. It's called bee bread. Bee bread is fermented pollen, technically. Bees are the only species, the only insect known to ferment their own food supply. They will bring back the pollen and put it into a cell and then ferment it, intentionally ferment it, and then they'll eat that as a protein source. How cool is that? So they are intelligently cultivating their crop inside this hive. They also do a lot of other cool things inside this hive, mitigating temperature and comfort and things like that. But this is a video thumbnail, so when you go to our YouTube channel, you'll find this thumbnail. I'll show you how to get bee bread. It's super cool. Some of the ancient Greeks, they would call honey the food of the gods, and specifically referring to bee bread. So bee bread is a nutrient powerhouse. It is something that if you eat too much, you can actually get vitamin overdose. It is a super, super good source of food. And it's not something that is traditionally sold. It's very expensive, but it is a superfood all by itself. And there's all kinds of research on this topic too. In the thumbnail on the YouTube, if you go into this in the description, there's a link in there that'll take you to a study on this, on bee bread. Super fascinating. So we recommend getting away from the Langstroth hives and moving into horizontal hives. Does anybody know that Langstroth hive isn't even the Langstroth hive he designed? So Langstroth, does that, when I say that, does anybody know what I'm talking about? So Langstroth hives are those tall white boxes you see traditionally all over America, right? This is the lay-ins model. So there's Langstroth and lay-ins that really kind of took everybody by storm. Langstroth designed the stackable model with wood and glass, but it was a 2-layer wall with sheep's wool or straw on the inside. Then he sold the patent to industry, and guess what industry did? Oh, we can get a lot more money if we just get rid of the second wall, all that insulation, and make it a single wall hive. So they did. They remanufactured the whole thing, and then they mass produced it, and now we have the common white boxes you see all over the US. Right here. This is from my apiary, this box. Yeah, so this box right here, the reason it's so banged up and gnarly, this has seen the entire continent. I put this in the back of my truck and we took it all around with us teaching classes, so it's seen all the events, it's been through all of it. It's been banged up and tossed around more than any hive you'll ever own. There's not even frames in here because the frames got so bad actually in the last one that we ended up using them at home, but I actually do have another box that there with frames in it if you want to see what those look like. But this is what we're doing, okay? So we use this horizontal model, and the Langstroth model, when we pull that off, well, we open this up and we say, hey, I need to check on my bees right now. I'm just gonna grab the frame and pull it out. It's gonna have all my bees on it, my comb. It looks like I got some wood ants in there. That's nice. And when we're checking on the frames and we're just pulling them out like this, your maximum 10 pounds. When you're working with a Langstroth box, you got up to like a 50-pound super, is what they call it, up at the top. It can be 6 feet tall, and you've got to lift that off, hunk it over to a drawer somewhere, loaded with honey. Each frame inside these boxes will come out to about 10 pounds if it's totally loaded with honey, max. So what we do is we catch wild bees, and then we bring those wild colonies that are adapted to our local climate, they're adapted to the local diseases, adapted to the local pests, and we take the frames out of those boxes, plug them into this box, put the lid back on, we're done. Super easy. So we check this box about 3 times a year, once in the fall and once in the winter, and then you don't have to, but I like to do kind of an intermediate check, just because I want to know that they're not dealing with hive beetles or mites or something. But I don't treat, there's no chemicals, there's no pesticides of any kind. A lot of beekeepers today will treat the brood chamber, which is where all the babies of the bees are. They'll treat them for diseases. If your brood chamber gets too cold, it becomes susceptible to diseases. And what happens when they pop the top of a box off and all that air whooshes out, and it chills the brood chamber. When the brood chamber is routinely chilled, it develops a disease. It's going to eventually have problems. So when we have a box of frames all the way across here, and it's propolis all the way through it, we take just one frame out of here, we have very little intrusion. Just one little slit about 1 inch big coming out of here. And we don't even have to go to the brood chamber, just checking to see when the brood starts and when the honey stops will give us an indicator of how good they're doing. We can just put it all back, we don't even have to open it up. Super, super easy. I have lots of videos on YouTube about this particular process of moving them from the hive to the hive box. Now, I talked about how the bees will bring water in, and what do you think they're doing with that water? Does anybody know what they do with it when they bring it into the hive? Mixing it, yeah, in their stomachs. They make honey in their stomachs. The water primarily is used for climate control. They'll bring it in if it's hot, and they'll all line the walls, and they'll create a wind funnel out the door and ventilate. If it's too hot, you'll also see them on the outside doing the same thing. It's called fanning. There's a whole bunch of them out there all shaking their wings, and they can actually detach their bodies from their wings so that when they're vibrating their bodies, it doesn't break their wings. It's super cool. So that's how they keep themselves warm in the winter. So you got thousands of them, 6,000 bees in here, all vibrating their whole bodies, and and their wings are holding virtually still. It's great. So, I just gave you a whole bunch of things to think about. Which direction do you feel like you're going with your current practices?
I feel like I'm fighting nature constantly.
Yeah. Out here, it's kind of like you can't get things to stop growing, right? Okay, what else we got? What is another problem we're dealing with here? Which way are we going? If you don't answer, I'm going to point at somebody. What about you in the back over here? You got which direction do you feel like you're going right now with your current practices? Beekeeping or gardening, homesteading?
Kind of in the middle, you know. We're just starting our orchard and irrigation processes,
awesome.
so we're kind of in the middle.
Nice, yeah. So you're kind of looking at the water already.
Yes.
Perfect, yeah, that's what I like to hear. Yeah, so it's one of these kind of dances, you know? We're kind of just swaying between, oops, I did that wrong. Oh, hey, here's the solution. Oops, I did that wrong. You know, it's not something you figure out overnight. I'm still learning new things every day. Like, this is a process, right? It takes years and years. But when it comes to beekeeping and permaculture, everything is so synergistic that if your focus is to keep bees like they keep themselves, keep trees like they keep themselves, keep your berry bushes and your annuals like they keep themselves, and learn the original conditions that species thrives in, and then duplicate it, you will have more success than your neighbors and their neighbors and their neighbors and their neighbors, and people will start noticing. They'll start coming to you saying, how did you do that? You'll be like, yeah, actually, I didn't water that all year long, and it's like huge, and I have so much, do you want some? You know, it just becomes this barter thing. And it's completely based on following the process of what does it look like originally in God's design, and how do we maximize that process in our yard? How do we duplicate it? We're not doing anything new. This is not new, right? So there's an area here in this give out, this handout I'm going to pass around and give away. It's called dynamic accumulators. Who's ever heard of a dynamic accumulator? If there's one term you remember, it's going to be dynamic accumulator. Dynamic accumulator will make the difference for your garden and your food forest and your orchard and your bees like no other species you can plant. There are so many dynamic accumulators in the world that they are starting to really laser in on this science and this process and study. And then for the first time in my whole life, I found what's called the Dynamic Accumulator Database, which is a list of almost 300 species scientifically studied for the last 10 years, where they calculated what specific nutrients that plant fixes in the soil, whether it's nitrogen, phosphorus, whatever. And so now there's a list you can refer to and say, actually, I know my soil is depleted in this. I can look at my database and find the plants that fix it. And then you simply plant it. Does anybody know what dandelions fix?
Good looking yards.
They fix good looking yards. Yeah, so, if I remember right, it's calcium and phosphate. But there's all kinds of species that do this. It's not just dandelion. And most things that we label a weed, turns out they're dynamic accumulators, which is kind of funny.
What's black locust?
Nitrogen. Black locust is nitrogen. Yeah, and so is alder. And out here with the thorny ones, thorny locust, that's nitrogen as well. A ton of those out on our farm. A lot of people will go into their property and they'll rip them all out and then they'll go plant stuff. And I'm looking at it like you just reversed nature's system so far. But that's fine. You want to get rid of all the thorns, right? What if we looked at it differently and we said, let's take that tree out because we have a better nitrogen fixer without 12-inch sickles on it. You know what I mean? And we put another one right back in. Maybe not the same exact spot, but something similar in that system. So we're not totally destroying things to come up with our new model. Does that make sense? So this is an urban design. That was Lulu's garden, one of the very first designs that we did out here. And this was with the backyard. This was just a polyculture garden on 3 hugelkultur mounds. Does that make sense to anybody? Hugelkultur? On our YouTube, I will be posting a hugelkultur video very, very soon. We don't have one right now, but we're editing it currently. So hugelkultur is a way of mimicking what happens when trees fall over in nature and then build the soil from there. And then a polyculture is where there's just a whole bunch of species all intermingling together. So this is one that we started on that mound. Spearmint will take over. So I just want to point out why that's there. Spearmint is very invasive. It will take over the whole bed. What we did is we wanted a spearmint bed mixed in with some other mints, but we wanted to be able to get a harvest on it while we're waiting for that spearmint to pick up. So we plant in a bunch of other species, let the spearmint do its thing, and then the next season, we take out the species that are remaining and let the spearmint take it over. So it's a 6-session process.
Sugar bed to decompose.
It can take 6 to 8 years, but it's immediately plantable. And the whole time it's decomposing, that culture bed is releasing nutrients back into the soil. There's actually a bunch of logs inside. And those logs soak up nutrients and moisture, and then your plants, like your annuals, will put down little straw roots that tap into the side of that log and drink from it in July and August. So it's super, super cool. It's a little water reservoir.
So, with the fugal culture, if you read the comments online of the people that want to do that to their raised beds, everybody's like, don't do it, it'll rob the nitrogen.
Yeah, it's a total false.
Okay, that's what I thought, but
Yeah.
I was like, going, that doesn't make any
Yeah,
sense
so-
because I've seen this work.
I'll show you some photos of the results of the soil of wood chips layered on. It's the same philosophy. If you till wood chips into your soil, you absolutely bind the nitrogen. If you layer it, how did I say in the beginning? Trees pull stuff up and the leaves fall. Do the leaves get tilled in? They just lasagna layer, right? So why would we come to our gardens and till everything in? What are we trying to achieve?
More till.
We're trying to expedite that process.
Makes
right?
it easier.
So what if we expedited that first fix? We did it once, problem solved. Now we came back in and we layered and followed that natural pattern. So we never had to till again. Would that make more sense? Now you can't do that on large scale acreage. This is where we live. We start to look at living mulches instead of things like wood chips. But a lot of people stray away from that whole idea because they'll see the wood and the soil and they'll say, wait, wood needs nitrogen to decompose, so it must be robbing it. Well, it doesn't. Trees contain all the nitrogen they need in order to break down. Everything does. Nothing can decompose without nitrogen. The little bit, if that tree was deficient in nitrogen, the little bit that it will take, it will only take from 1 to 2 inches around it. And so when we're putting things down inside, a foot of soil, nothing that you're ever planting annual-wise at the top soils is ever going to be affected by that. Wood chips, even if they're in the top 1 inch of soil right there, your plant roots are going to go below the 2 inches. And so you're still okay. So I've never ever had a problem with wood chips and nitrogen. I've never had a problem with culture and nitrogen, and I do this all over the country. Does that answer your question?
Thank you.
Now, I got up on the screen here some plant recommendations. You're welcome to take a photo of this or write them down. I got 3 slides I'm going to go through. Plant recommendations for pollinator gardens. These will all enhance the yield of your bees and the yield in your garden. So these are some herbs in the first slide. Basil chives. Comfrey is a dynamic accumulator. It's fantastic. And also, if you have a compost pile, you can take your comfrey, put a hole in the center and shove it down. It's known as an activator, and it will kickstart the decomposing process. Yeah, mint is a little bit invasive. I love mint. I plant it everywhere. If you don't want to get rid of your lawn, just plant mint. That smells good when you're mowing. All right, so here's another one. These are vegetable flowers. Cucumbers, leeks, onion, pumpkin, squash, and broccoli. There's obviously quite a few more. I really like ambrosia melons. Always see flowers or bees on my strawberries and things like that too. Now these are specifically bee-friendly plants. Garden and wildflowers. Calendula and nasturtiums, roses and sunflowers, zinnias. Yarrow is a nitrogen fixer and one of my favorite. I plant that in every single guild I can. Yarrow is very versatile, very hardy plant. It's medicinal. It'll help with blood clotting and all kinds of issues inside the body. It can be turned into a salve, and it's a great dynamic accumulator, and the bees love it, and it helps with medicinal qualities in the honey. It's a great, great plant. If there's a plant you're going to take from this whole list, I'd do yarrow. Never do a guild without yarrow. So this is how we started. On your wood chip topic, the garden that I'm referencing up here, one of the first ones we did in an urban territory, because we're in an urban environment here, this would be appropriate. This was grass. So getting started, we mowed the grass down to the dirt as low as you possibly can. I didn't do any tilling. Mow it down as low as I could, and then I went and got a really cheap lawnmower, and I lowered it down just so the blades were almost in the dirt, and I mowed it down even lower. And then I went and knocked on my neighbor's house, and I said, hey, I really like my neighbors, so I'll do something friendly for you. I need to mow your lawn. And then afterward, I raked up all their grass, and I brought it to my garden. So I made friends, and I got a garden all at the same time. So now, why did I bring all that grass and put it back there if I just mowed all the grass out? What am I trying to do?
Compost.
compost the grass. Why do I want to compost the grass in my garden?
Nitrogen.
Nitrogen. Grass is 4% nitrogen. So grass clippings are 4% nitrogen. If you have grass rooted still, what's it going to do in your garden? It's just going to come right back up, right? Especially if you have something like, what's that crazy one that's got the long vine on it? Just grows through anything. Does that ring any bells? Bad grass. Something like that, yeah. It's a bad invasive grass species. It's terrible. It'll go up the side of your raised bed and everything, but I haven't seen any of that out here. Most of that's in the west. All right, so the process one, your local arborist will probably dump chips on your property for free, mowing your grass down, and then you come out and with your wife and the kiddos and spread it around. Okay. Then once it's done, and you've gone through that process, as long as you're doing 12 inches, there's a lot of smothering happening here, okay? 12 inches of wood chips. Now when I come back into the garden that same year to plant, I do not plant in the wood chips. Never plant in the wood chips. What you're doing is you're making a funnel, or you're making a row, and you're putting your compost down to the soil and up to the top of the chips. And then you're planting in the compost for that first season, okay? And then you can mulch over the top of your compost with the wood chips. But if you try to spread 12 inches of chips and then plant underneath it, what's going to happen? It's just going to fall back in and suffocate all your plants. So don't do that. Do the funnel, raise the soil level up just where you're planting, but with compost, and plant in the compost. After about a year of this, your wood chips will decompose down to about 6 to 4 inches. If you got a lot of water, it'll be lower. And then if you, by year 2, you're going to have this really perfect soil that just happened all by itself. There will be mycorrhizal fungi through the whole garden. Does anybody know what that is? So one of the reasons the forest can sustain itself, it's probably the most important reason I could mention today, is called mycorrhizal fungi. Imagine a spider web in the ground connected to every single root in the forest. Now imagine not just connected to it and grabbing it, but also it actually has a synergistic relationship with it where it burrows inside of the root and then literally extends the root surface through the entire web of that fungi. So one tree is pulling nutrients from the top of the mountain all the way to the bottom of the mountain, and that mycorrhizal fungi will move nutrients and water for it. So it has a barter and a trade in the forest. So we can barter and trade in our communities the same way, right? You need a little bit of something and you call your neighbor, right? This is the same model that we're applying with TIAG. The reason that this works with the wood chips is mycorrhizal fungi. If that fungi were not a part of this equation, this would be a terrible idea. It would sit there forever, it would not move nutrients, it would not share nutrients, the water would not do its job, it would not decompose as fast, it would take forever. But because of mycorrhizal fungi, we develop a whole network inside here. So the grapes are working with the peppers, and the peppers are working with the tomatoes, and the tomatoes are working with the squash, and we've got all of the perennial trees interacting with each other. So all of this is synergistic. Does that make sense? So this is really important, just the mycorrhizal fungi part of this. Now I'm going to kind of speed through these photos to just show you some pictures of our food forest project under here. Here's that reference I was talking about. This is the second year of a 12-inch wood chip layer. And this is the nice rich black soil as a result from the worms and everybody that comes up.
Now, are there any wood chips that you avoid, like walnut?
Nope, I compost all the wood chips I can. I get all of them. The only thing that I would ever recommend, if you know it's black walnut, is let it sit for 2 to 3 weeks, before you move it to your pile. Black walnut exhibits juglone, and it is in the bark. And so juglone is an inhibitor. It's a chemical that the plant releases that is known to inhibit the growth of other plants around it. And so juglone can be a problem for annual gardens. But I see this right here, this is a walnut tree. But look at everything growing underneath it. This is a medicinal garden. It does have some fruit and varieties in there. This was 2.5 roughly hours from here in northeast of us. So this is when you hear people tell you that these species don't agree together, chances are they're right. But take it like a grain of salt and do your own thought process on that, because there's some ways you can get around it. If you walk into the forest out here, you see wild black walnut everywhere, there's berries underneath it. But then you go talk to a master gardener and they'll tell you you can't grow anything around black walnut. So Well, ask God. So companion planting is really the gist of this, of guilds. It all boils down to what's called polyculture. There is a system and a design to it. The simple way of explaining it is companion planting. But there's much more, it's kind of like companion planting on steroids, right? But what I'm going to encourage you to do is get a garden journal and do all of this. Just experiment with it. And then record your whole process. And then try and duplicate it next year. And see what you can learn and grow from your notes. And then start that process over again. If you do that, you'll have more success than anybody else in the room. You're the only one here that does that. Okay, so this is a really big deal. Duplicating your process. Do, record, and duplicate. Any questions on this graphic? I know there's a lot of small words on here nobody can read.
Is that available on your website? That
It is, yeah. You go to
for reference?
TIAGcommunities.org, and there's just sign up with a free account or get the paid membership, and you'll get access to this graphic here. And this is actually an outdated one. We have a much more improved model now, but yes. So here's an example of a permaculture design for a desert. There's just a plant list on either side of it. Example photo we did out for the deserts in southern Utah. And then just as a vote of confidence for everybody, if this is a lot and you're feeling like you're gonna need more time to digest this, we have, in our travels, we have networked with a lot of people. And so we do all of this collaboration and all these webinars and discussions in the TIAG community. So you can get a free membership to get access to me and my team. You get the paid membership, you get access to the professionals around the country. So there's lots of ways to get involved. I just want to put that out there. We're quite all over the place. And so if you have friends or family that are struggling as well and they weren't able to hear this today, then you can point them in the right direction as well. And that's the link there. If you have to put the HTTPS, if you put www dot, we're having a weird technical issue with the web and it won't go there. So do HTTPS TIAGcommunities.org. Now, actually I'm gonna leave it right there just for a second.
What's your opinion of Nicholas?
So I love Hitlighter for the research that he did. He spent years figuring out exactly what nutrients all the plants wanted. But then he took it, it's like he looked at all the plants in the ground and said, I can take them out of the ground and just give it all the nutrients I want in any condition and it'll grow. Which, he's not wrong. You can grow in any condition if you got food and water. You might not be very happy, comfortable, or healthy, but you're gonna grow. Does that make sense? And so my approach is, I love it for the research, but I don't do it. I follow the patterns that I see in nature, and I do what God did to sustain my food and my family. That's a very common question that I get, and that's kind of the conclusion I've come to. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, so I'm gonna give this one away that I'm holding here. This is the garden planner. It'll tell you when to plant things and when not to. And I just wanna hear at least 3 cool facts from my slideshow, from the same person. You're gonna give me 3 cool facts. Then I'll give you this. Raise your hand if you're feeling lucky.
Permaculture is a good thing. Chips are a good thing. Sawdust would be a good thing.
Yeah,